I spent a week at the #1 barbecue spot, Goldee's BBQ, and what they taught me in just a few days about seasoning, cooking, and running a successful restaurant changed the way I cook barbecue at home forever. And today I'm going to share with you 5 things that instantly leveled up my barbecue. So whether you have a smoker, a gas grill, or just a kitchen oven, if you want to get better at barbecue, this deep dive video is for you. So right now you're probably wondering, how do I get my brisket to look like Ant's tantalizing B-roll? Well, this first trick will not only help you get a midnight black bark like a Goldee's brisket, which is on your screen right now, but will also unlock the secret to why restaurant briskets taste so much better than the ones that we make at home. Here's how I discovered it. So at 5 a.m., Jalen and Lane get to Goldee's to prep briskets before they put them onto the pit. The briskets are already trimmed, but the guys do one more go around just to make sure the fat cap is nice and even on every brisket. Once done, they move on to seasoning the briskets. So the vast majority of you have probably already heard of the Texas barbecue secret, which is that restaurants use salt, 16 mesh pepper, and Lawry seasoning salt. This combination is used as a rub in a lot of Texas barbecue joints. Now, this secret gained so much popularity. YouTubers got hundreds of thousands of views covering it, and even Texas Monthly did an article on it. But as I've traveled over the last 2 years to different barbecue joints, I've learned that this info is simply outdated. Most restaurants I've seen aren't doing this anymore, and Goldee's was the first restaurant to reveal this info to me. The briskets are seasoned with 16 mesh pepper and salt, just as expected, but they're not finished with a coat of Lawry's. Instead, Goldee's uses their own in-house seasoning recipe. The Goldie seasoning salt is slightly saltier than Lawry's to my taste and has way more flavor. It's finer than Lawry's too, so it coats the brisket more heavily and makes the bark look super dark. And most importantly, the rub makes the brisket flavor absolutely pop. When you taste it on a brisket, it just blows your taste buds away. You can buy the Goldee's rub at Walmart or online, but I'm gonna show you how to make a copycat recipe that's basically Lawry's on steroids. And the best part is, you probably already have all of these ingredients in your spice cabinet. I call this recipe Crack Lawry's. 4 tablespoons of Lawry's, 1 tablespoon of Knorr chicken bouillon, 1 teaspoon of ginger powder, 1 teaspoon of mustard powder, half a teaspoon of chili powder, and half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. It's like Lawry's, but on crack, in a good way. This seasoning adds more depth to the flavor of Lawry's and also complements the ingredients it already has. It makes it a bit spicier and a bit brighter and packed with umami. It also makes the Lawry's finer, so just like the Goldee's rub, you get max coverage on your brisket when you use it for that super dark bark. But warning, okay, you gotta be careful with this. Don't be going all willy-nilly with this without learning the ground rules first. Okay, keep in mind that the chili powder and chicken bouillon, which are the main add-ins for this rub, are both ingredients that are very salty. So this rub makes an already salty Lawry's even saltier. Goldee's uses Creekstone Upper Choice briskets, which are insanely marbled. So the saltiness of their seasoned salt cuts through the fat and balances the flavor. Now, Creekstone briskets are super expensive, so I don't suggest you buy one of those. For those who are interested, I think one brisket is like $175, not including tax. But instead, get a nice marbled prime brisket from Costco or Sam's Club, and you will be absolutely fine using the Crack Lawry's at home. But if you can't get prime brisket, just get the best brisket you can, and then just use less salt on your brisket before you add the Crack Lawry's. Also, I only use Crack Lawry's on the fat cap of the brisket because it would just be way too salty if I used it on both sides. The next thing I learned from Goldee's literally rewired my brain and changed the way I approached backyard cooking forever. So I remember thousands of cheeseburgers ago, when all I had was a Weber Smoky Mountain, I was convinced that the only way to make a perfect brisket on my smoker was to make it run more like an offset smoker. All I would ever hear on YouTube was just how amazing offset smokers were and how you can only make authentic Texas brisket on one. So I only used post oak wood chunks and charcoal, and I'd put my brisket fat cap up when I was using my Weber Smoky Mountain. Now let me explain why this was a horrible idea. So at Goldee's, they cook their briskets on twin 1,000-gallon smokers. However, they cook their pork bellies and pork ribs on an M&M rotisserie smoker, which is basically a giant rotating pellet grill that uses wood splits instead of pellets. Not only do these rotisseries cook food super efficiently, but the quality and consistency of the food is also incredible. In fact, so many restaurants across the US have bought these smokers because a lot of pitmasters think they actually cook ribs better than an offset can. And also for the record, I've also tasted brisket off of one of these smokers, and it was incredible. Better than some offset briskets that I've had. But what I realized is that in order to get killer ribs on the rotisserie, like I tasted at Goldee's, you have to cook the ribs like you're cooking on a rotisserie, not an offset. I know, it sounds stupidly obvious, but in the past when I tried to make an offset brisket on my Weber Smoky Mountain, the brisket just ended up being a bad version of an offset brisket. Just like if Goldee's tried to mimic an offset rib cook and ran the rotisserie at 275 Fahrenheit for 6 hours. The whole rotisserie would probably catch on fire. So how can you use this knowledge to actually improve your barbecue at home? Well, I wanted to share a trick I came up with for bottom-up cookers like pellet grills, Kamados, and Weber Smoky Mountains that I haven't seen anywhere else on the internet that will give you the best bark and rendered fat on these types of cookers. So rule of thumb when cooking brisket on any smoker is that you want to put the fat cap facing the heat source so that the fat can properly render once the brisket is done cooking. So this is a huge problem for bottom-up cookers, and that's because you would put the fat cap face down on the cooking grate if you followed this advice, and that would scrape off the seasoning off of the fat cap. And just like I shared in the first thing I learned, right? The seasoning is super important if you want to cook a really good brisket. But I came up with an easy fix for this. Okay, so for bottom-up cookers, start the cook with the fat cap facing up. You want to cook it nice, low and slow around 225 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 hours. And then flip the brisket fat cap face down until it's time to wrap the brisket. So that initial 2 hours with the fat cap facing up will allow the rub to set a bit so that it doesn't just flake off if you put it on your smoker. And then once you flip the brisket, you still get the benefit of rendering the fat with the radiant heat from the smoker. Moving on to the third thing I learned, which is actually another trend that swept the internet a couple years ago. And when I went to Goldee's, I realized I'd been doing it completely wrong. And this trend is the Goldee's no wrap method. So the technique is pretty self-explanatory. You cook your brisket all the way until it's finished, and then you wrap the brisket in tallow and foil. For the last year, the barbecue YouTube meta was dominated with Goldee's brisket method videos, raking in millions of views. But even with all that info out there on this technique, there were still some things I had wrong about it that I only realized when I was wrapping briskets with Jerby Barbecue. So first off, I realized I was not using enough tallow in the wrap. So the tallow sits at the bottom of the wrap and it softens up the bottom of the brisket and kind of confits it as the brisket cools down from its done temperature of around 200 degrees Fahrenheit to its resting temperature of 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It also mellows out the smoke flavor and the saltiness of the brisket. So if you don't use enough tallow, you get less of these benefits. When I first learned this technique, back when Jerby Barbecue revealed it on his YouTube channel a couple years ago, I was only using like 2 tablespoons of tallow per brisket, but at Goldee's, they use a whole cup. Secondly, you gotta make sure that the brisket is completely done before you pull it. The last part to finish when you're cooking a brisket on an offset are the muscles that sit right at the bottom center of the brisket. So to see if it's done, you just put your fingers under the brisket, feel those muscles, and then make sure it's not tight before wrapping and resting it. And finally, don't use this method if you're not using an offset. Now, is it possible to do? Absolutely possible. I posted a video myself on the Goldee's no wrap method on a pellet grill and the brisket came out fine. But the Goldee's method was meant for the offset because on an offset, briskets are cooked super low and slow over 12 to 14 hours, so there's not a threat of burning or drying out the briskets if it's done correctly. What tends to happen if you use a regular backyard smoker, like a pellet grill, and use the no wrap method is the flat can get super dry, or the fat won't render well. And in some cases, both things can happen. My preferred method for wrapping briskets on a non-offset smoker is butcher paper, but the foil boat method is great too. Now the fourth thing I learned at Goldee's made me grow so much as a barbecue cook, and if you can do this one thing, it can 10x how fast you can improve your barbecue skills. Here's what I learned. So Goldee's is only open Friday through Sunday. And so on Friday, the first day of service, I was just in the dining room chilling and chopping it up with Jalen. And while we were talking, one of the employees came up and told him that while this employee was prepping the pudding, something went terribly wrong. Somehow the pudding broke and it was super thin and soupy. Now, for context, this is the banana pudding I'm talking about. And the banana pudding at Goldee's is phenomenal. Some people wait in those long lines for hours just to get the banana pudding. And that watery concoction that was sitting in front of us still had that incredible Goldee's banana pudding flavor. But Jalen told his employee to throw it all out. If the food is not up to Goldee's standard, they won't serve it. And what really shocked me was that the whole day, almost every customer asked for a banana pudding because, again, it's so stinking good. And every time they would ask, Jalen would say, "We don't have banana pudding today. I messed it up. I'm sorry." Jalen's level of accountability blew my mind. Question: how many of you have had the following scenario happen? You're cooking for your family or for some friends, and during the long cook, something goes wrong. And so every time you serve someone a plate, you tell people it started raining during the cook, or the wood was super unseasoned, or insert whatever classic barbecue hurdle that comes up. Now this mindset is killing your barbecue gains. Because think about it, the weather, the wood, all of these things are external factors. These do nothing to help you improve your barbecue next time, and they just give you excuses. Jalen's accountability changed me because instead of blaming someone or the circumstances, he owned the mistake. So now when I run into problems, when I cook and the food doesn't turn out right, my first thought is, how can I cook better when those adversities hit next time? Change your mindset on this, and in no time, you'll learn how to cook on any smoker under any conditions. Now, the final and most important thing I learned happened on my last day at Goldee's. So every day of service, before the doors open at 11 a.m., the Goldee's team cuts a full tray just to taste everything and make sure it's all up to Goldee's standards before they serve it to customers. And I was able to join this tasting on Saturday of the week I visited, which was like a dream come true. I remember watching Alvin Zoe's Day in the Life series where he sat down with the guys and ate the tray. And now here I was doing the exact same thing. But shortly after I sat down and the high of this experience began to wear off, I realized my only other experience of ever eating Central Texas style barbecue was when I had the Goldee's tray the day before. And so while we were eating the tray on this fateful Saturday, this interaction happened.
I think it's better today or yesterday.
I would say it was really good yesterday. It's really good right now.
Yeah.
You know?
So embarrassing. All I knew was that the food I was currently eating with the team and the food I ate the day before was a million times better than any barbecue I'd ever had in my life. It was completely on a different level, but I couldn't tell you the nuance or detail that made it stand apart so much. Which is why if you really want to get good at Central Texas barbecue, you need to do a barbecue crawl at the best barbecue spots to understand how the best tastes. But what if you don't have the means to travel all the way to Texas and then spend even more money on craft barbecue? Well, the free and easy solution to this problem is to watch my detailed tray breakdown of one of the best new barbecue joints in Texas, Redbird Barbecue. I cover how the tray works together and why the food is so good, and you can check that out on your screen right now, and I'll see you guys over there.